The Empire of Ghana, which had ruled much of West Africa for 500 years, went into decline at some point during the 13th century. Its power weakened, its client states demanded independence, and finally, one of its own conquered subjects eclipsed it in power, snapping up its old dominions and seizing control of the lucrative Saharan trade routes. This was the beginning of a new empire. Eventually, even the Ghanaian kingdom was absorbed into this rising power, and it would become known as the Empire of Mali. The Mali Empire inherited much of the wealth and power of its predecessor, but it developed the system of Trans-Saharan trade to eye-watering size. As is always the case, it's not just goods that flow up and down trade routes. Human cultures also travel along them too. And with the increasing traffic of trade across the Sahara, West Africa was slowly being introduced to new and exotic ways of life. Chief among these foreign imports was the Arab culture, and along with it, the young religion of Islam. For the early kings of Mali, converting to Islam was an entry point into the world of the Mediterranean coast. It was a way to gain acceptance and influence among these various powerful kingdoms. The first Malian king we can reliably say was a Muslim was named Sundiata Keita, and he ruled in the first half of the 13th century, nearly 100 years before Musa. But religion would always form a fracture that ran the whole length of West African society, dividing the rich from the poor and city dwellers from the countryside. The people living in the farms and villages of West Africa, the people who worked the land and herded the cattle, were what we call animists. The Muslim chronicles record these kinds of beliefs with barely concealed contempt.
They worship idols among trees and stones. They make sacrifices to them and pray to them for their needs. Among these people are diviners and sorcerers.
But in the cities, Islam was the dominant religion, at least in name. For a West African citizen of this time, becoming a Muslim had a number of benefits. It helped you to build a rapport and trade with the foreigners who arrived from across the desert, and at times it allowed people to avoid certain taxes. And it also shielded people from the increasingly bold, slave-taking raiders who came down from the Sahara. Just like in Christian Europe, under Islamic law it was illegal for a Muslim to take another Muslim as a slave, and this prohibition was taken very seriously. The 14th century Islamic scholar Makhluf al-Balbali was one of the first to set this law in writing.
Anyone who is known to be from those lands, which are known to be the lands of Islam, and who mentions he is from those lands, should be let go and should be adjudged free. This was the ruling of the jurists of Andalusia.
Legal disputes would even erupt periodically over whether it was allowed to sell slaves who had converted after being captured. And for the Kingdom of Mali as a whole, converting to Islam offered similar protections.
Islamic law does not permit slave trading. Many Muslims throughout the Indian Ocean world ignored those rules. And so they plundered and captured Africans, Indians, Southeast Asians, usually non-Muslims.
Both Christianity and Islam asserted the value of a person as created by God. Yet adherents to both faiths accepted the capture, sale, and ownership of men, women, and children from Africa. The Atlantic trade to the west centered on labor and shipped at least 2 men for every woman. The Indian Ocean trade to the east centered on services and included soldiers, cooks, and concubines. It shipped roughly 2 women for every man. By 1807, Britain had finally turned its back on the slave trade. Naval warships were dispatched to suppress the slave trades of other nations, leading the British Royal Navy into the Indian Ocean and into direct contact with the slave traders of Zanzibar.
Moi, je suis très choqué. Je suis pas à l'aise quand je voyage à l'étranger et des gens, peut-être comme vous ou comme d'autres, ils me demandent est-ce que l'esclavage existe chez vous? J'ai honte pour mon pays.
Parce que c'est interdit.
Oui, oui, c'est interdit l'esclavage.
Depuis quand?
Il est interdit depuis 1981. Quel est le sort des victimes d'esclavage aujourd'hui? Quand ils sortent de l'esclavage, ils viennent, mais il faut les accompagner. Sinon, il y a 2 choix. Ils vont s'installer dans les villes et ils vont grossir les rangs des pauvres, des criminels et des gens comme ça, parce qu'ils sont pauvres. La pauvreté, c'est quelque chose de très difficile. Ou, à défaut, ils retournent chez les maîtres. Ils disent, moi, je me suis libéré, je n'ai rien à manger. Au moins, avec les maîtres, j'avais quelque chose à manger.
Et le prix d'un esclave?
Ah non, je ne sais pas, ça, c'est depuis très longtemps. Hein. On n'a pas connu de vente d'esclaves.
Pas en ce moment?
Non, pas en ce moment, non. Dans l'esclavage traditionnel, que ça vient de la maman. Ça vient de la maman. Quand votre maman est esclave, vous devenez de facto esclave. Et ça, ce sont tous les présidents donc, de la Mauritanie qui se sont succédés sur ce pays. Ils disent que l'esclavage n'existe pas. Et après quelque temps, ils disent, voilà, nous allons prendre des mesures pour lutter contre l'esclavage. On ne lutte pas contre ce qui n'existe pas. Parce que la responsabilité du gouvernement...
Et il y a la loi.
Il y a la loi. Donc ça va. Et même maintenant, des gens ont fait la prison parce qu'ils disaient que l'esclavage existe. Des gens ont fait la prison parce qu'ils ont assisté des victimes, ils ont aidé des victimes. Ils ont dénoncé, ils ont parlé aux journalistes comme vous.
C'est dangereux?
C'est dangereux.
Pour vous aussi?
Ça, je l'assume et je le supporte. Et je me prépare à tous les dangers qui sont liés à ça. C'est ça.